The train's whistle shrieked through the morning air, its smoke billowing into the pale Wyoming sky like a cloud of grief. Clara's hand pressed against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass, as Rock Creek Station loomed ahead. Her wedding dress, worn and dusty from the long journey, clung to her body like the weight of 1,000 miles. She had come all this way, but there was no one waiting. Not anymore. "Ma'am," the conductor's voice cracked through the stillness, his brow furrowed as he eyed her attire. "You sure someone's meeting you here?" Clara forced a smile, brittle as dried leaves. "My husband," she whispered, her voice betraying the lie. He had promised he would be here. The words stung like salt on a wound that had never healed. But the promise had already died. Her husband had been in the ground for 2 weeks. The train screeched to a halt, and Clara stepped onto the platform, the heat of the sun smacking her like a slap. She stumbled, her legs weak from the journey, her heart heavier with every breath. And then, through the haze of exhaustion and dust, she heard it, a small voice full of innocent certainty. "Mama!" Clara froze. A boy stood by the water tower, his hair wild and sandy, eyes wide and clear, like a morning sky after rain. Her heart skipped. She knew those eyes. "That's my mama," the boy said proudly, pointing directly at her, his words carrying the innocence of a child who had been promised a miracle. Clara's chest tightened. "Sweetheart," she whispered, forcing her legs to move. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy answered, his grin wide and pure. "Tommy Callahan. My pa's James. He owns the Double C Ranch." Her world stuttered. The name, James Callahan, cut through her like a knife. Her James. Before she could say another word, a voice sliced through the silence. "Thomas Michael Callahan, you get back here this instant!" A woman hurried toward the boy, her face round and kind. But Tommy ignored her, stepping forward with a certainty only a child could have. "Are you really my mama?" he asked, his wide eyes full of trust. "Pa said you'd come back one day. Said you'd be wearing a white dress like an angel." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled, reaching toward the boy, but before she could speak, the storm that had always followed her life arrived in the form of a man she had once loved and lost. He stood just beyond the station steps, broad-shouldered, sunburned, and taller than she remembered. His black hair was pulled back with a strip of leather, but it was his eyes, storm gray and unreadable, that stopped her heart. "Get away from him," he growled, his voice a rough command. "James." Clara's chest tightened with the weight of a love she could never forget. She whispered his name. "James." He didn't flinch. His eyes locked on her for the briefest second before he turned toward the boy. "Mrs. Henderson," he barked, "take Tommy to the wagon." The woman led Tommy away, but not before he turned his head and shouted, "Mama, I knew you'd come back." The platform fell silent, save for the creak of the rails and the wind whispering through the distance. James's boots thudded against the wood as he stepped closer, his scent of leather and tobacco suffocating the air between them. He stopped just in front of her, anger flickering in his eyes. His gaze softened, only for a heartbeat, before the hurt took over. "Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Or should I say, Mrs. Crane?" The words cut deep. The truth was out. He knew. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. "James, please, let me explain." "Explain?" His laugh was bitter, sharp. "Explain how you promised to wait for me. How you married another man 3 months after I left for war." She felt the sting of it, the accusation slicing through her, but she wasn't about to let him close her off. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. His eyes flashed, the storm in them turning violent. "No choice?" he said coldly. "That's what they all say, Clara. That's what they all say." She stopped herself, the words choking in her throat. "My father. He forced me. I was drugged, James. I didn't want to marry him. I woke up with a ring on my finger, and every letter I sent to you was intercepted. He kept me a prisoner." James's eyes flickered with something, pain perhaps, but it disappeared before it could show. He shook his head. "How convenient," he muttered. "Now that your husband's dead, you come crawling back to me." Clara's chest ached. She wasn't crawling. She had never stopped loving him, but the hardness in James's face remained unyielding. "You'll find a room at the boarding house." "Mrs. Murphy takes in strays. You should stay there until the next train east." "James, please." Clara reached for his arm, but he jerked away. "I don't want your pity," he growled. "You think I'm supposed to just forgive you, after everything?" "I didn't leave you, James. I was taken from you. I swear to you, I never stopped loving you." James's face softened for just a moment, but it was fleeting. He glanced toward the horizon, as if looking for something he could never find. His voice was quieter now, but the pain was no less real. "The Double C Ranch is 5 miles north. You'd better get going." Quote, "James, please," her voice trembled. "You don't understand. I came back for you, for us." He didn't respond, just turned away, his back to her once again. The storm in her heart raged. But Clara didn't leave. Not this time. Clara stood in the dust, the weight of James's words still heavy in the air. The sound of the train's departure echoed behind her. But she didn't move. She was too numb to feel the heat, too lost in the flood of memories and pain to care. Mrs. Henderson had taken Tommy to the wagon, and the silence left in the boy's absence gnawed at her heart. She had come all this way for him, for James, but now she was alone, alone in a place she never wanted to return to. Clara looked toward the horizon, where the sky was a stormy gray, mirroring the heaviness in her chest. The wind kicked up dust and sent the dry scent of sagebrush into her nostrils, but it didn't clear her head. It only made the memories of James more vivid, his touch, his warmth, the promises they'd made before life had ripped them apart. She could still feel the sting of his last words, "There's nothing for you here." But Clara knew better. There was something. There had to be. The boarding house was just as Mrs. Murphy had described. A small, unremarkable building, tucked between 2 larger, older houses in the center of town. The wooden steps creaked under Clara's weight as she climbed them, the flickering light from the window casting long shadows across the floor. She knocked softly on the door, not wanting to disturb the stillness inside. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s appeared, her sharp eyes scanning Clara from head to toe before she stepped aside. "You must be Mrs. Crane," she said with a nod. "Come in." Clara stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the fire and the smell of fresh bread mixing with the stale scent of old wood. Mrs. Murphy set down her knitting and smiled gently at Clara. "You'll be fine here, for a few nights at least," she said, as she motioned to a small, dimly lit room in the back. "Get some rest, child. Tomorrow we'll talk more." Clara didn't argue. She needed rest, needed time to think, to gather the strength to go back to James, to ask for the second chance she had no right to. The bed was small, the sheets rough, but it was a bed, something she hadn't had in days. She sat down slowly, her eyes drifting to the small window, where the rain began to fall again, its steady rhythm like a heartbeat in the night. She had always loved storms. When she was young, they had been her escape, her place to hide, to think, to feel safe. Now, they felt like a warning, a sign that something was coming. A reckoning she wasn't sure she was ready for. The next morning, the storm had not let up. The streets of Rock Creek were empty, save for the occasional passerby hurrying to get out of the rain. Clara walked into the kitchen where Mrs. Murphy had already set a pot of coffee on the stove. "You'll be wanting to head up to the ranch then," Mrs. Murphy said, her voice calm, steady. Clara didn't reply. She wasn't sure what to say. The words were there, stuck in her throat, but they wouldn't come. She had known this day would come, knew she would have to face James again, but she hadn't expected the storm inside her to be this fierce. "Don't worry about the rain, girl," Mrs. Murphy continued, pouring a cup of coffee. "You've got fire in you. I can see it." Clara didn't answer. She hadn't felt fire in years. After a long silence, Clara stood. She wrapped herself in the oilcloth Mrs. Murphy had given her, her boots sinking into the mud as she walked out the door. The wind slapped against her face, the rain lashing at her like 1,000 tiny needles. She didn't care. The cold didn't matter anymore. The ride north was slow, the mare's hooves sinking into the muck, the storm howling around them. Clara kept her head low, her thoughts too tangled to make sense of. She had to go to him, had to face him, had to tell him the truth. The Double C Ranch was 5 miles north, but it felt like an eternity before Clara saw the outline of the house through the rain. She urged the horse on, pushing through the storm, desperate to reach him. By the time she arrived, she was soaked through, her body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline. She barely had the strength to dismount before the door flew open, and there he was. "James, are you insane?" He roared over the storm. He grabbed her arm, pulling her inside without a word. Clara's teeth chattered, but she couldn't look away. His presence was overwhelming. His anger, his pain, it all rolled off him in waves, and it was so familiar, so painful. "You could have died out there," he snapped, his voice sharp as a whip. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I had to come," she whispered, struggling to hold back tears. "I couldn't stay away." He didn't say anything, just grabbed a blanket from a chest and draped it over her shoulders. He didn't look at her, just stared into the fire, his jaw clenched tight. Clara sat on the edge of the chair, her hands shaking as she tried to warm herself. The cold didn't leave, but the fire was a welcome distraction. She had made it. She was here. But now what? "Where's Tommy?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. "Upstairs. Fever broke this morning," he muttered, his voice still rough with emotion. The mention of Tommy made her heart ache. She had come here for him too. She needed him to see her as his mother, as the woman who had never stopped loving him. James turned toward the stairs without another word, his steps heavy. Clara followed, her feet stumbling over the floorboards. Tommy was lying in the bed, his small face flushed with fever. He was awake, his eyes blurry but bright with recognition. "Hey there, partner," James said softly, his voice breaking as he knelt beside the bed. "How you feeling?" "Thirsty," Tommy murmured, blinking up at them. When he saw Clara, his face brightened. "The angel lady, you came back." Clara's heart nearly broke as she knelt beside him. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his small fingers wrapping around hers. "Hello, Tommy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your pa's been taking good care of you." Tommy nodded, his eyes growing heavy. "He always does," he mumbled, then drifted back to sleep. Clara stayed by his side, her heart full, but her soul still aching. James stood in the doorway, watching them both, and for a moment she wondered if it would ever be enough, if she could ever make things right. Clara sat by Tommy's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing, a small comfort in the midst of the storm. The fire crackled downstairs, the soft hum of its warmth filling the silence that had settled between her and James. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something had shifted in the space between them, but she couldn't tell what. She had expected the coldness, expected the anger, but she hadn't expected the weight of the years to settle between them like a mountain. The storm had broken in Tommy's fever, but it still raged inside her and James. The door creaked open, and James stepped in, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He didn't look at her at first, just stared at Tommy, his expression unreadable. "Is he better?" Clara asked softly, her voice hoarse from the nights of restless sleep and unspoken words. James nodded, his jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. His actions had always spoken louder than words. He moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain to peer out at the rain-soaked land. The world outside was a blur of gray, the storm still howling in the distance, but inside the quiet was louder than ever. "James," Clara said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I know you're angry, and I understand why, but please, I need you to know the truth. About what happened, about why I had to leave." He didn't turn to her. His hands tightened on the edge of the windowsill, as if he could anchor himself to the world outside, away from the world inside. "I already know the truth," he said, his voice low, steady. "You've said enough, Clara. It's been 5 years." "I haven't said everything," she whispered, her chest tight. "You think you know the truth, but you don't. Not the whole truth." You never understood why I had to leave, why I couldn't wait. My father, he was cruel. He forced me. I didn't choose this." He turned to face her then, his expression hard. "You think I didn't suffer, Clara? You think I didn't feel every second of the 5 years you were gone? You think I didn't wonder if you were out there living a life with him, a life I didn't get to have?" The pain in his eyes hit her like a freight train. She could see it, the years of torment, the nights spent alone, wondering what had happened to the woman he loved, the woman who had promised to wait. She felt the weight of it all, crashing over her like the storm outside. "I never wanted that for you," she said, stepping closer. "I never wanted you to hurt. But I didn't have a choice." James's eyes flashed with something between rage and sorrow. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers, but his fingers stopped just short, as if he couldn't decide whether to pull her close or push her away. "5 years, Clara," he muttered, his voice rough. 5 years of lies. 5 years of thinking you'd chosen him, that you'd chosen a life that wasn't mine. And now you're standing here telling me you never wanted it. But you don't get to fix it, not just like that. Quote, "I'm not trying to fix it," she said softly, her heart breaking with each word. "I can't fix it. I can only tell you that I've never stopped loving you. I never will." He closed his eyes, letting out a harsh breath. When he opened them again, there was a vulnerability in his gaze that made Clara's breath catch. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked, his voice low. "Why wait until now?" Clara swallowed hard, the answer lodged in her throat. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that you'd never forgive me. Afraid that the man I loved wouldn't look at me the same way again. And because I was afraid that even if you did, it wouldn't be enough." James's face softened just a fraction, but the hardness didn't fully fade. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair, his mind clearly somewhere far away. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he said quietly. "I don't know how to just forget the years that have passed. The hurt, the way you left me without a word. I never wanted to leave you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to believe me." Quote, "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice cracking with the weight of everything unsaid. "It's been too long, Clara. Too much has happened, and I don't know if I can ever forget what you've done." His words stung more than anything he'd said before. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to close in on her, the distance between them stretching farther than she ever thought possible. But she wouldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything she had already fought for. Not after traveling so far to find the man she still loved. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm, her touch gentle, tentative. "I know it's not easy. I know I've hurt you. But James, I need you to understand something. I didn't choose him. I never did. And even when I thought I had no choice, my heart never stopped calling out for you. I've always been yours. Always." His chest rose and fell with a heavy breath, his eyes locking on hers with something that almost felt like hope. "You don't know how badly I've wanted to believe that," he whispered, his voice breaking. "How badly I've wanted to believe in us again." He closed the gap between them then, his hands gently pulling her closer. Clara's heart raced in her chest as he leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "Then believe in us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's make this right." The world outside seemed to still, the storm quieting for just a moment as their lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, as if all the years of longing and pain had built up to this one moment. Clara's body responded instinctively, the years of separation melting away with the warmth of his kiss. It was everything she had imagined and more, raw, tender, and full of emotion. When they finally pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers again, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly, but Clara smiled, her hand gently cupping his face. "I do," she whispered. "I know exactly what I'm asking." And for the first time in 5 years, the storm inside her finally began to quiet. Clara stood in the silence that followed, her heart still beating wildly in her chest. The storm outside had softened. its fierce winds now reduced to a gentle murmur, as though the land itself was waiting for what would come next. She felt the weight of James's presence in the room, his breath slow and steady against her skin, but it was his silence that cut through her like a knife. They had kissed. A kiss that spoke of years lost, of pain buried deep, of everything they had once shared and everything that had been taken from them. But now, as they stood together, the space between them felt wider than ever. It wasn't just the years, it was the ghosts that still lingered, the unspoken things that had to be said, but neither of them knew where to begin. James pulled back slightly, his hands resting on her shoulders as he looked into her eyes, his gaze searching. "I'm not sure how to do this, Clara," he murmured, his voice rough but steady. "After all this time, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I can just pick up where we left off." Quote, Clara swallowed, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. "I don't expect you to forget everything," she whispered. "I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm not going anywhere. Not again. Not unless you send me away." His jaw clenched, the anger and pain still simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else there now, something that hadn't been there before. A flicker of hope, buried deep within the stormy gray of his eyes. "I don't want to send you away," he admitted, his voice softening just enough to reveal the vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. "I don't know if I can let you back in, but I don't want you to leave either." Clara took a breath, the air thick with the weight of his words. The tension between them was palpable, yet she felt the stirrings of something more, something fragile but real. She had come back for him. She had fought for this. And she wasn't going to let fear dictate the course of their lives any longer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," she said, her hands gently finding his, squeezing them softly. "I'm not asking for everything to be fixed today. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I'm still the woman you loved, that I never stopped loving you." James's chest tightened at her words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the walls he had built around his heart began to crack. He stood there, unmoving, as though battling with himself. His hand reached out, trembling ever so slightly, and touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. "I've spent 5 years building these walls," he said, his voice barely a whisper. 5 years convincing myself I didn't need you, that you didn't want me." "I didn't choose that," Clara said softly, her heart breaking all over again. "I never wanted any of it, James. But I came back because I believe in us. I believe in what we had." James closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back the emotions, threatening to break free. When he opened them again, there was a flicker of the man she had known, the man who had once held her in his arms and promised her a future. "I don't know if I can forget," he whispered, his voice cracking, "but I want to try. For us. For Tommy." The mention of Tommy's name made Clara's heart ache. She had seen the way the boy's eyes lit up when he saw her. He was their link, the thread that connected them, the reminder of the love they had shared. She couldn't walk away from him. From them. "I don't need you to forget," Clara said, her voice steady with newfound determination. "I just need you to remember what we were, what we could still be." James stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. He nodded slowly, as if making a silent agreement with himself. Then, without another word, he turned toward the door. "I'll be back in a minute," he said, his voice firm. "Get some rest. You've been through hell." Clara watched him leave, the weight of everything that had just passed between them settling into her bones. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension that had once felt suffocating beginning to fade. Maybe they weren't ready to start over just yet, but they were starting to bridge the gap. She walked over to the window, the view outside still a blur of rain and fog, and watched the storm move further into the distance. She knew there was still much to face. She knew the road ahead would be hard, and that there would be days when the ghosts of the past would haunt them both. But for the first time since she stepped off that train, Clara felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The sound of boots on the wooden steps brought her back to the present. She turned, her heart in her throat, to find James standing in the doorway. His face was still drawn with the pain of the past, but there was something else in his eyes now, something softer, something that said he wasn't giving up on them, not yet. "I'll give you a chance, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "But you have to promise me something. No more running, no more secrets. If we're going to make this work, we have to do it together. No more walls." Clara's heart swelled at his words. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I promise. No more running." Quote. James stepped forward, his hand gently brushing her cheek before pulling her into his arms. This time, she didn't hesitate. She melted into him, the warmth of his embrace a balm to the wounds that still ached. Together, they would find their way back. Together, they would rebuild the life they had lost. And as the rain finally stopped and the sun began to break through the clouds, Clara knew that their second chance was beginning. Not perfectly, but real. And that was enough. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of quiet moments and tentative steps. The storm had passed, but the aftermath still lingered in the air, thick and heavy with the things left unsaid. Clara spent her mornings tending to Tommy, helping him with his meals, sitting by his bed when he needed comfort, and quietly watching James as he worked the ranch. He was always busy, always moving, as though action could erase the tension between them. But Clara knew better. She could see the shadows in his eyes, the way he still held himself back from her, as though afraid to let her in again. And yet, despite the walls he had built, there was something softer in his gaze when he looked at Tommy. She saw how he loved the boy, how he cared for him, even when the world seemed like it was too much to carry. It was late one afternoon when Clara found herself standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew. The smell of the herbs and vegetables mixed with the warmth of the fire, and for the first time since her arrival she felt something like peace settle over her. The past few days had been a strange kind of limbo, neither here nor there, neither fully healed nor completely broken, but today felt different. James had come inside earlier, his shirt soaked with sweat from working in the fields. He had nodded at her but hadn't said much. His silence was familiar, a part of him she had once known well. And yet, every time he was near, Clara could feel the pull between them, the unspoken promise of what they could still be. She turned when she heard the door creak open, her heart skipping a beat as she saw James standing in the doorway. The light from the setting sun caught his face, softening the hard edges that had dominated his expression for so long. His eyes were still stormy, still filled with the weight of years gone by, but there was something in them now, something warmer, more open. "You're quiet today," Clara said softly, her voice a little tentative, unsure of how to bridge the gap that still lay between them. James nodded, stepping inside. His boots clacked against the floor as he crossed the room, his movements slow, as if he were trying to find the right words. He stopped near the stove, watching her as she stirred the pot of stew. "Tommy's better," he said, his voice rough, but there was a softness in it now, an acknowledgement of what she had done for his son. Clara smiled, turning to look at him. "I'm glad. I hate seeing him sick." "Yeah," James said, glancing toward the window where Tommy was playing outside, his laughter drifting in through the open door. "He's been asking about you." "Has he?" Clara's heart tightened. She had spent so much time trying to make things right with James, she hadn't even thought about how Tommy might be feeling. He had only known her for a few days, yet in that short time, he had already begun to look at her like she belonged. It made her want to stay, made her want to be a part of their world again, no matter how much the past still held its grip on them. James stepped closer, his boots squeaking softly on the wooden floor. He hesitated before speaking, as though carefully choosing his next words. "Clara." His voice was low, unsure. "I can't promise things will go back to the way they were. I can't promise I'll be the man I was before. I can't promise I won't still be angry sometimes. But I want to try. I want to fight for us. For Tommy. I can't do this alone." Clara's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face him fully, her heart swelling at his words. The wall between them had cracked. He was speaking, not from the place of pain and anger, but from something deeper, a willingness to try again, to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I know we can't just go back. We can't undo what's been done. But we can start fresh. We can build something new. And I'll be here no matter what, I promise." James reached out, his hand brushing against hers, his touch a quiet plea for connection. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know how to trust again, but I can't let you go either." Clara took his hand, her fingers wrapping around his, grounding them both in the moment. The silence that had once felt so suffocating between them now felt like a comfort, a space where they could begin to rebuild what had been broken. She had come back to him not just because of the love they had once shared, but because of the hope that they could find it again. Together. The evening light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over them both. Clara's heart raced as she looked into James's eyes, seeing something there that hadn't been there before. Something that spoke of possibility, of a future they could still have if they were both willing to take the leap. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice steady and full of promise. "I'm here to stay, James." He squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing the back of hers as he nodded. "Then we'll figure it out, together." The words hung in the air between them, a quiet vow, a promise that this was only the beginning. There was still so much to overcome, so much to heal. But for the first time since she stepped off that train, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't alone. They had a long road ahead of them, but together they could face whatever came. The door opened again, and Tommy came running inside, his face flushed with excitement. He spotted them standing there, hand in hand, and his face broke into a wide grin. "Pa! Mama!" he said, his voice full of innocence and joy. "Come play with me!" Clara and James exchanged a look, a shared understanding passing between them. No more running, no more ghosts. They followed Tommy outside into the golden light of the setting sun, the sounds of laughter filling the air as they began to build the life they had always dreamed of. Together, the days stretched on like the quiet hills that surrounded the Double C Ranch, each one a step further into the new life Clara had come back to. The pain of the past still lingered, but it was no longer the weight that defined her every movement. There was lightness now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. And with every passing day, that warmth grew, filling the spaces between Clara and James, between Clara and Tommy, with something resembling hope. The ranch, once a place of solitude and distance, had begun to feel like home again. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was real. The work was hard, but together they faced it with a quiet understanding, the rhythm of their days growing more familiar with each sunrise. Clara spent her mornings with Tommy, teaching him the things she had missed in his early years. They would sit together under the shade of the oak tree by the barn, reading from the old books she'd brought with her. Tommy loved the stories, his eyes lighting up as she read, his small hands gripping the pages as though they were treasures. He was eager to learn, to fill the gaps that had once kept him apart from the mother he had never truly known. James worked beside them, his hands rough from the hours spent laboring on the ranch, but his eyes often flickered toward Clara. She could see the softness in him now, the way he had begun to open up in ways he hadn't before. There were moments when he would glance at her with something in his gaze that made her heart skip. Something more than affection, something deeper, something that said they were rebuilding what had been broken, slowly but surely. One evening after a long day of work, James came inside, his shirt soaked with sweat and dirt. He looked tired, but there was a lightness to his steps now, a contrast to the heavy man who had first returned from the war. Clara watched him as he washed his hands in the basin by the door, his movements automatic but steady. He turned to her then, his eyes meeting hers with a soft intensity that made her breath catch. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, almost unsure. "About us. About what we're building here." Clara set the towel down, her hands stilling as she looked at him. What are you thinking?" James paused for a moment, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to find the right words. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't the same as before. There was no barrier now, no anger or resentment. Just the quiet, steady beat of their hearts, both tentative, but willing to move forward. "I'm not going to pretend everything's healed," he said finally, his voice rough but real. "But I think we're heading in the right direction, and I want to keep heading there, with you." Clara's heart swelled at his words. She had come back for this, for the chance to rebuild, for the chance to make things right. And now, standing in front of her, was the man she had always loved, vulnerable yet strong, willing to try again. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking for perfection, James. I'm asking for us. For a chance." He stepped forward, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek in the familiar way it always had. "We've both done a lot of hurting, but we're still here, together." She nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't leaving. She was home. The sound of Tommy's laughter outside broke the quiet between them, and James smiled softly, a warmth spreading across his face. Clara turned to look out the window, watching as Tommy ran across the field, his little arms flailing as he tried to catch a butterfly. James's voice broke through the moment. "He loves you," he said, his tone soft and full of pride. "I can see it in the way he looks at you. The way he talks about you." Clara smiled, her heart swelling even more. "I love him too. I've always loved him. I just didn't know it yet." James stepped closer, his presence warm and comforting. He reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. A peace that wasn't about forgetting, but about healing. A peace that was built on the foundation of love, trust, and the promise of a future they would build together. Later that night, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Clara and James sat by the fire. The crackling of the wood filled the silence between them, and the warmth from the flames wrapped around them like a blanket. James leaned back in his chair, his arm resting on the back of hers as they both stared into the flames. "I still think about her," James said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Clara looked at him, her heart aching with the knowledge of the woman he had lost, the woman who had stood in the place of her for so long. She reached out, her hand finding his, squeezing it gently. "I know," she whispered. "I know you do, but you don't have to carry her memory alone anymore. I'm here. I'm here with you." James turned his hand over, his fingers wrapping around hers, and for the first time in years, Clara felt his grip steady and sure. He didn't look away from her, his eyes holding the weight of the past and the hope for what was to come. "No more ghosts," he said, his voice firm but full of promise. "No more running, no more hiding." Clara smiled softly, her heart light. "No more ghosts," she echoed. Outside, the moonlight bathed the ranch in silver, the quiet of the night broken only by the soft chirping of crickets. The world seemed still, as though everything was waiting for them, waiting for the moment they would finally step forward. Together, into the future. Clara rested her head on James's shoulder, the warmth of his body comforting her in a way nothing else ever had. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. She was home, and this time she wasn't leaving. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Clara whispered softly into the night, "Only you, James, always." And beneath the endless sky with the stars shining bright above them, they knew that this was their second chance, their real beginning. And this time, nothing would tear them apart.